All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson, and today very excited to introduce my guest, Dr. Bessel A. Dr. van der Kolk, welcome.
Welcome. Hi.
All right, Dr. van der Kolk is a clinician, researcher, and teacher in the area of posttraumatic stress. His work integrates developmental, neurobiological, psychodynamic, and interpersonal aspects of the impact of trauma and its treatment. Dr. van der Kolk and his various collaborators have published extensively on the impact of trauma on development, such as dissociation, borderline personality, and self-mutilation. He's published over 150 peer-reviewed scientific articles on such diverse topics as neuroimaging, self-injury, memory, neurofeedback. Dr. van der Kolk is also the founder and medical director of the Trauma Center, past president of the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, and professor of psychiatry at Boston University Medical School. Dr. van der Kolk, again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here.
Good to be here.
All right. So, before we were recording, I kind of set the stage a little bit. I read your book. It was amazing. I'm not just saying that. One of the things that really struck me, and I guess I would kind of set the stage by talking about this. There was a part in the book where you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you were early on in your career and you were in a group, and I think it was of women, and one woman in particular was sharing her experience with you, and you kind of jumped in there. I think like maybe a lot of new clinicians think they're doing or hope they're doing. And I think you were trying to appease her or kind of mitigate. Talk a little bit about that. And
talking about when I try to help people that they shouldn't feel what they were feeling.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, we're not to blame.
Right.
You should blame yourself.
Yeah.
And she says, well, you keep saying these things to make yourself feel better, but it's obviously that you have no understanding how to actually make me feel better. You try to cover up by telling me I shouldn't feel that way, that I'm not to blame. Huh? And I give this example very much as an example how cognition cannot get you there. Mm-hmm. And so at the core of psychology, even the people who now hate Freud, they still believe basic notion of Freud is that if you can talk about it, everything will go away. And that is a mixed thing. On the one hand, it's important to know that being able to say what happened is important to own the experience. And so much of trauma has to do with keeping secrets from yourself and people around you. So being able to tell the truth and finding words for your internal truth is terribly important in order to have ownership of your life. On the other hand, knowing where things come from and understanding why you feel so horrible does not make feeling horrible go away. Mm-hmm. And so what I think a lot of psychology traditionally makes a mistake by understanding something, you change the problem. But understanding just helps you to understand why you screwed up, which is not bad.
Right.
But then you need to go, okay, but how do I reorganize my survival brain to feel safe and not to feel helpless? And so what has really emerged more and more, when I started to write, I wrote this article, The Body Keeps the Score, in 1994. And one of my patients had told me, my body keeps score. And I thought that, yeah, that nails it. And so 10 years after I wrote this article, no, 20 years after I wrote this article, I wrote my book called The Body Keeps Score. And every month I become more aware that the body keeps a score. Mm-hmm. When I first wrote a paper, it was a neurobiology paper, and the body people were sort of curious that this Harvard guy was talking about the body, so they came to listen to me. And then after hearing me talk, they said, actually, you talk about the body, but I don't think you have a clue about how to work with the body. Would you like to learn? Mm-hmm. Good, arrogant person, I initially said, why would I want to learn from the likes of you? And so very gradually, they were very gentle with me. And then people like Peter Levine and El Peso and Pat Ogden took me under their wings and taught me something about the body. And it sits in the body. It sits in that your whole system, your organism is rewired to feel threat everywhere. It's on a very primitive, elemental survival part of your being.
What was that like for you, kind of making that shift in learning about the body and being able to utilize that when you were working with your clients?
Well, I think I'm still not as good as like my wife is a real body therapist, mm-hmm. and she gets to really touch people and have people feel very visceral experiences. I'm still constrained by being a psychotherapist by not touching people. I think oftentimes she does better work than I do.
So are you saying I should be interviewing her?
Oh yeah, yes. I can write, and she can also. But most people who are very good in terms of just getting attuned to the body, working with the body, and reading people's bodies with their hands, are really also very good writers, because it's a different intelligence, of course. Mm-hmm. And so the yakkers yak and the touchers touch.
So if we go back to that scene in the book where you're talking about that group there, how did that unfold for you as a clinician? Where did you go? What
happened in that group is actually interesting. And that is that, there's a group of incest survivors, and I really believe that if you come from secrecy and shame, being able to share your story and your reality and your internal world with other people who resonate with you and say, yes, I know, but it's like, I thought I was the only person in the world who felt that way, but it's good to meet other people like you, was a very important thing. But I went to this group for 17 years. Wow. And after about 10 years, I thought, this group is not moving. And they continue to not have a life. And I saw their bodies, but I learned something about body therapy, and they continue to be in a collapsed state. At that time, I did not know how to translate that into action. And after 70 years, I said to the group, guys, I need to stop this group because I'm stuck. And I think I'm stuck because I don't know about the body. And I wish one of you or all of you would have realized that you're also stuck, and that you had started to talk about what else you can do to really move on with your life. But because you trust me so much, you haven't done that. And so I need to tell you, I'm going to go and learn how to work with the body, because this is what's keeping you from being able to move on. And so by opening into that, I got into theater. And I think theater is a very powerful way of helping people to inhabit different bodies. And so one program I love to talk about is a program involved in Western Mass called Shakespeare in the Courts. That if you're a juvenile delinquent in Berkshire County, you may get condemned after stealing a car and breaking into a home to become a Shakespearean actor. A terrifying experience. And here you have these collapsed, frightened, angry kids who've never spoken very many words besides shit and fuck, who need to utter a whole Shakespearean sentence and say something like, if he had not so resembled my father, I would have done the deed myself. And to really feel that sentence and have the director say, who is your father? Does your father love you? Does your father know you? Do you know who your father is? Would you like to do the deed yourself with your dad? Have you ever thought about killing him? And to really embody language. And so I learned that from Kevin Coleman and the Shakespeare people, how to really help people to embody things. And then the latest thing I do in that regard is I run psychodramatic structures that I learned from Albert Bessel, where people actually physically have experiences that they did not have at a particular time in their lives. And where people, the situation regressed enough so that in these psychodramatic structures, you live out pieces of your past in three-dimensional structures, and then you rearrange things, and people can say, oh my God, if somebody would have helped me or protected me back then like this, and the action is happening at this point, they go like, oh, my whole life would have been completely different.
Is that like psychodrama, basically?
It's a particular form of psychodrama, yeah.
Okay. I was watching a video that you did. I think it was in Los Angeles. You were speaking to a group there, and the person who was introducing you was referring to another talk you did, in which was in front of a bunch of therapists, apparently. And I think your opening remark was something to the effect of, basically, your licenses are, I don't know what you said, but it was like
No, I always say, we get a license to malpractice.
Right. So
Yeah.
what? Okay, talk about that. What's behind that?
Well, what's behind it is that, there's a real, very big difference between being an academic and being in the trenches. And since I've always had one foot in academia and one foot in the trenches, I am very aware that these are two different things. And so when you do research, which I do, you deal with a very narrow population, very narrow parameters, and you try to understand one small aspect of something. But you sit in the trenches, you see people who smoke dope every day and who got drunk last night and got into a car accident. All these people will be excluded from academic studies. So the academicians make up models of the world that they then get imposed on clinicians, and the clinicians say, oh, well, these smart people at some famous institution made it, let's do it. But the people who they were treating were nothing like the people you see in reality. And so people learn things like CBT in the graduate school. And CBT works very well for, actually it doesn't work very well, because I've tried CBT on my wife many times. Really pointed out the error of her ways and to have her understand her misperceptions and how she really should perceive the world more accurately. And whenever I do that, she says, oh, thank you so much, I'm really very grateful for your pointing out how my reality is disturbed. My teenage kids, similar thing. They really, really just eat it up when I correct their misunderstanding of the world. Like, how low has psychology sunk that people believe that confronting people with their irrational beliefs makes any sense? Are these people who have ever been in a relationship with anybody? It's so weird. And so the things that are being taught to people are I see it all the time. We get students applying to our fellowship program, and I say, so what did you learn in your internship? And I said, oh, I learned CBT. How do you like it? And they say, oh, I love it. It's really great, and it's just really love studying it. So good. So can you give me some example of people you have worked with where CBT really worked very well? And they say, oh, but these patients, they're awful patients. You do one session with them and they don't come back. So, I'm just looking for better patients to give my CBT to. And I think the world is very much like that. notions about how people should be. And you have people work in the trenches who see the reality, but working in the trenches is such a low prestige job that people rarely ask people who really work with really disturbed people, can you tell me how to treat people like that? People go to somebody who is in a fancy department somewhere, who never sees these patients themselves for expertise. Huh? So there's this gigantic disconnect between research and practice. That's what I've tried to do with my career and with my center is to always marry the research to the actual clinical practice.
Right, right. What is it that you feel, I mean, with that, that you just said as kind of a backdrop here, what is it that clinicians in general, newer clinicians who are missing? That marrying, of course, but what does that mean? What does that look like as far as you're concerned?
You know, I don't think there's anything missing with the clinicians. I find them hardworking, dedicated, and slightly too trusting of authority. And I know when you go to school, I did it myself, and you have these teachers who you admire, who you want to be like, and so you try to emulate them. And then you're out of school for 10 years, and it isn't working. And for a while, you blame yourself for, oh, it's working because I'm not good enough, or I didn't listen carefully, I didn't study hard enough. And then if you continue to really observe, you say, actually, it isn't working, not because I'm doing something wrong, but because the method doesn't work. And that's what I was very fortunate in my own training, I write about it in the book, is that in the first year of our training, this was the most prestigious Harvard program at the time, our teacher said, I don't want you to read any books in your first year. You have only one teacher, and that's your patients. And I want you to spend numerous hours with very, very disturbed people and just try to figure out what's going on with them. And don't read any books, but because if you read books, it will get in the way of your accurately observing what's going on. I thought it was the best damn training I could have ever had. Mm-hmm. And that the patient trumps the textbook.
Are you seeing that now in education? Is that being taught now, or?
Oh no, I think less so.
Yeah.
So I think it's more and more protocol driven and prescription driven. It's prescriptive rather than learning from. Yeah. And so the people who learn from are oftentimes the people who don't have a lot of formal education, like actors and yoga teachers and regular teachers who just are not contaminated by these protocols of how you should do things. Yeah.
Now, a kind of follow-up question here is, how does that type of learning then, right? If you're talking about rather than learning from books initially and taking everything in from your clients, your patients, what is that demand then of you, of the clinician?
Tolerance of feeling lost at sea and terrified, which this work is anyway. Tolerance of getting in touch with your own mirror neuron system and how your own feelings get reflected in somebody else. And really, so what we had in our training was very good supervision. And so what was it like for you? When this person was screaming at you, what did you do? Oh, I screamed back. Okay, that's a normal response to scream back. Now, what can we do next time is to just sit back and observe how somebody is screaming at you. And to really notice how you feel versus how the other person feels. So that your mirror neuron system does get hijacked by that other person, and you try to actually affect their mirror neuron system by your becoming very quiet and still and peaceful. See if you can exercise your energetic power to help that very enraged person to calm themselves down rather than mirroring them. Mm-hmm. Learn how to really be in relation and to use the energy between human beings to get people into a path of stillness and quiet is very important. We don't learn that in school.
What was that process like for you, kind of when you realized, you know what, I'm not going to be able to read a book, or I shouldn't read a book, but instead sit there with these people, with these patients? What was that like for you?
I'm a generically disobedient person. So I kept reading books anyway, of course. We all did, under the covers of that. But no, I think the process of fully embracing your ignorance is fantastic, actually. And I liked it. And I've always liked it. I mean, this field of traumatic stress didn't exist when I first started it. And you have people who dissociate and people who have different personalities. And you go like, what the hell is going on here? And so really continuously observe variations is terribly important. And part of the virtue of having our center is we show our videotapes to each other. Mm-hmm. And we know that our diagnostic manual is just a useless bunch of nonsense, basically. It doesn't have any scientific validity whatsoever. But we very carefully look, this person cannot hear, or this person cannot engage, or this person cannot really make use of information, or this person keeps getting stuck in the same thing over again. So we're very much into observing subtle issues, which I very much learned from the body workers also. And I'm also very involved in neuroscience. And I'm very involved in neuroscience of perception and how people take in new information. And one of the striking things about working with traumatized people is that they have a hard time learning. Because the mechanisms of their brain to take in new information gets quite impaired. So a very big part of my work is how do you change the brain so that people can learn new things, actually?
One of the things that has really struck me about my experience here doing this podcast is one of the questions I ask is, to share an early error, an early mistake, and what the guest has learned from that. And inevitably, Dr. van der Kolk, it has come down to my guest talking about not so much about an intervention that they messed up, or that they misread something on page 32 of this book, but of them not trusting themselves, or of them interfering with the relationship, or not being courageous enough to take that step. Talk a little bit more about that. Why is that challenging, or do you think it is challenging?
Actually, I would say that the greatest mistakes are with not tolerating your ignorance, for me. And so when people do something you don't understand, you try, I and sure many of my colleagues, try to make them do things to make us feel less stupid or ineffectual. And of course, the more experience you get, you actually get to know a few things, so you can allow yourself to be more ignorant. So my great teacher I talk about in the book was always ignorant. And he modeled his ignorance to us because he was confident. Of course, when you're a young person, you're both ignorant and at loss. And then you tend to sort of push people into doing things. But I think the mistakes that I make and many people I work with is to try to control people's behavior so that you don't feel so helpless. It's not a big issue for me anymore.
It's not, you said it's not a big issue anymore?
Okay.
It's not a big issue for you as much?
No, I think I can really, like my old teacher now, really scratch my head and say, you said that. I mean, I've always admired Columbo, the old movie. And he actually, like, I think a good therapist is like Columbo. Yeah.
If you had, and you probably have this at the trauma center there, but if you had a small group of people sitting in front of you, students who wanted to, get into this field, what would you advise them? What would you say to them?
Let's say bring your videotapes.
Bring in your videotapes.
Yeah. Let's watch videotapes. Let's look at the process, what happens here. What do you think would have happened if you had kept your mouth shut at this point? What would somebody else have said at this particular point? Would you have moved your body forward? Would you have changed your tone of voice? Would you have sat back and breathed a little bit different? So I think God is really in the details, and yakking never gives you the details. I think you need to have the multimedia exposure. So you need to see the process, and you need to hear people's change of voice, people's change in posture. You need to see how the body follows the words, basically. It's very much about following the body.
In terms of, you talked about tolerating your own ignorance. Why is that challenging for a lot of us?
Well, because we think ignorance is the same as stupidity. But it isn't. Ignorance is the opening to learning. And I think I'm not blaming our school system necessarily, because it's pretty universal. But but some school systems are much better in helping people to use their ignorance to create new things, of course. Again, in education, it's also just like in psychology, more and more prescriptive, more and more tests. Have you learned that? And very little emphasis of, wow, aren't you surprised about, or aren't you interested that you didn't understand this?
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know why the sky is blue. I know there's an answer for it somewhere, but I can't give it to you.
Why do you think, not so much why you got into this field, but what makes you as effective as you are doing this work?
Well, it's always a question whether you're effective. But I think the root of effectiveness is to your own self be true, huh? To really trust what you see, and to love to follow your muse, huh? To actually, that if you like to work with the body, go work with the body. If you hate to work with the body, don't do it. Do something else. But so again, something that our culture isn't very good at. But you need to really follow the things that are rewarding to you. That you really can wake up in the morning, be enthusiastic about, to look forward to, continue to work with people. So if you are puzzled and amazed how some people talk ragtime and what happens in their brain that ragtime comes out, go and become a schizophrenia person. Again, go like, wow, where did this come from? If you hate people being illogical, don't work with schizophrenics. Yeah.
So really, what I'm hearing you say is kind of really honoring your gut in a sense, where that's taking you.
Whatever you do needs to match with a core inner curiosity and sense of satisfaction. Yeah.
So you're saying that you've always had a great satisfaction about individuals who've been impacted.
I've always really enjoyed what I do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that curiosity has really been in your favor, worked in your favor.
Yeah, and also I get punished on a regular basis also.
Punished by your patients?
No. So when I started the trauma center, for example, a person on my floor who's now a famous psychiatrist said, Bessel, you are so obsessed with this trauma stuff. When you croak, nobody will ever talk about trauma anymore. And I said, Alan, I hope so. And then my clinic gets closed at that hospital because we are the boutique. We are this esoteric little group of people who talk about something as strange as childhood trauma. And then our clinic gets closed somewhere else because we're supposed to do drug trials, and because it makes money for the department, and we don't bring enough money. So, there's a reason why people are not true to themselves, because if you're true to yourself, you may be all by yourself at some point. Yeah.
You wrote the book, The Body Keeps Score, and again, we're going to have all this linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. What was your main impetus for writing this book, would you say?
Many impetuses, I think. One of which is that I interview residency applicants every year, and for many, many years. And I always ask people, what book have you read that inspired you to want to become a psychiatrist or a psychologist? And for the last 10 years, 12 years, none of them has given me the name of a book that they said, that book just got me to do it. Mm. I thought that was just astounding, because when I grew up, I read all the time. And if you would tell me what books inspired you as an 18, 19, 20-year-old to do what you did, I can give you the names. I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, Man's Search for Meaning, Eric Fromm, Escape from Freedom. Those were the books, Paul Marcuse. These were the books like that. Yeah, boy, I want to do this for a living. I want to devote my life to this. So most of all, I wanted to write a book that if a young person would read it, like, because psychiatry has become such a desiccated, soulless profession. I don't see how anybody ever wants to be psychiatrist anymore, giving pills to people. It's a pretty sad profession. And I wanted young people to read this book and go like, this is the most interesting in the world. I am going to devote my life to exploring how the mind works and how we can help people to lead good lives. As it has turned out, I think it has mainly been, the main impact has been of a lot of survivors reading the book and saying, that is me. Finally, somebody gets it and gives me some pathway out of the misery that I'm experiencing.
Well, it's pretty powerful to have done that.
Pretty lucky to have done it. I feel very fortunate, actually. Like, when you write a book, you never know how soon it will be on the remainder table, Right. And I've been just delighted and felt blessed by how many people are reading it and how many people like it. So.
From my perspective, you seem to straddle different kind of segments, academia, practicing, and so forth, and with a large kind of overlay of irreverence.
But also reverence.
Also reverence, but it seems to really inspire, I think, a lot of people, and it definitely inspires me. How do you do that? How does that work for you?
Character is destiny. I'm a multilingual person. I'm a Dutch person. I come from a very small country originally, where if you travel 50 miles to the south, you speak a different language, and 50 miles to the east, you speak a different language. And so I grew up in a multicultural culture. And intellectually, I've always been multicultural. I've always loved poetry and art, and I've always loved science. And so that's my character. I studied classical Greek, but I was not a great classical Greek student because I was spending too much time also studying physics. And so today also, I'm trying to be a serious neuroscientist, but I love clinical work and I love psychodrama and all this sort of stuff. And if I would leave out any of these pieces, I would feel that I was not true to myself. But that's me. I cannot expect other people to also have a real passion for science and a passion for the intricacies of therapy, which is not science.
So let's, as we kind of close out here, I want to put that question to you in terms of a book that has inspired you recently that you would like to kind of suggest to our listeners, whether trauma related or not. What would you say?
Trauma related books. My latest book that's exciting for me is a book called Silk Roads. It's the history of the world in terms of how peoples have always traded goods and stuff with each other, and all the wars and misery and religions, tensions that occurred in the context of it. I adore that book. It's just amazing. And I've read history all my life, and almost in every page I found another piece of information that I didn't know before. But that's not that all about trauma, because people do try to gain dominance, of course, cause a lot of trauma, but it really has nothing to do with clinical work. I don't read many clinical books. I read a lot of scientific literature. I peer review a lot of things. If you want me to talk about the latest peer-reviewed article that I reviewed that I'm excited about, I'd love to tell you about it, because we are learning stuff about brain circuits and how brain circuits have to do with your insula and the degree to which your insula, namely your connection between your brain and your body, registers something as being relevant. And it has something to do with the cerebellum and how the cerebellum organizes you to become focused on particular subjects. And if the work of my colleagues, this is Ruth Lanius' lab, is anything to go by, this is going to be the main theme of my annual conference this year. At some point, if people actually get to integrate and take in this very complex information, that treatment has more to do with the action that you take and the actions that you get taught than actually how you talk about it. So I've always been a fan of martial arts, and indeed that things like martial arts and making music can really organize the way that your brain engages with the world. Mm-hmm. And I think, to my mind, that's where we as a profession needs to go to, is to find ways in which we can help people to pay attention differently, to focus differently, to help people to figure out, and not figure out, but to organize what is relevant and what's irrelevant. And all these systems in our patients are very disturbed. All kind of irrelevant information starts running the show. It's hard for them to focus. It's hard for them to switch sets when something isn't working into something else. And these are all mind-brain capacities that have almost nothing to do with understanding. It has something to do with really organizes the way that the human organism engages with things. And that's the frontier of our field, as far as I'm concerned.
So with the understanding that this is one of the newer articles, do you want to share the name of that, or would you be willing to?
It's
okay.
Not
okay.
But the issues here is the understanding about the mind and brain as networks, and it has to do with the salience network of the brain. What does your mind automatically find relevant in terms of paying attention to? And the executive function of your brain, of how do you organize yourself to accomplish a task? And the default state of your brain, what are you like when you're not engaged with anything at all and you're just with yourself? And it's these networks that need to be organized. And I think our job as clinicians is to figure out how to best organize and reorganize these networks. And so part of what I'm doing is I'm doing neurofeedback research, applied neuroscience, to see how by playing computer games with your own brainwaves, you can reorganize those brainwaves so that your mind engages with the world in a different way.
Wow, exciting. Clinically, in addition to the video games, what else have you?
Well, that's not video. Actually, it's feedback. In the same way that when I say something you like, you have little crinkles like your eyes, and when you're bored, you see a little trope in your face. You give me feedback all the time, huh? And you change my brain as we're talking to each other. And so you can amplify those feedback systems with computer games that really picking up what happens in your brain and then helps you to make more of one thing and less of another thing, basically.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this. If people want to reach out to you and find out where you're going to be next, what talk you're going to be giving to next, what's the best way for people to...
My website, besselvanderkolk.net.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page. Dr. van der Kolk, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We'll be in touch.
Okay. Be good. Bye-bye.